Wreck-It Ralph is a movie I was surprisingly never too big on as a kid, which is kind of a surprise since I was huge into video games at the time of its release. That's not to say I thought it was a bad movie or anything. I thought it was pretty good. Third grade me was absolutely mind blown to see a Mario character officially in a Disney movie. Though I did rewatch the movie recently and I thought highly of it. I think it's a pretty solid movie, especially considering it's like a early 2010s video game tie-in movie in a way. And up until recently, video game tie-in movies have not been very good, so this was definitely a banger. And just like many movies in the early 2010s, it got a video game tie-in, which actually did impress me as a kid. I remember when I first heard about it, I honestly thought it had potential to be a very good game, considering the whole movie was based off video games. This was also one of the last video game tie-in movies of its time, as they started to finally die off slowly around this era. But hey, it's been almost 12 years since I've heard about this game, and I just now got the chance to buy and play it. And dear God, this might be one of the worst movie tie-in games I've ever seen, let alone played in my life, and I do not mean that lightly. I've played some pretty bad outings, but this one, I think this one might take the cake. The game was published by Activision, who you probably never heard of before, but they're responsible for a small amount of hidden gems, and the developer was Foundation 9 Entertainment, who I can't really find much development history on, aside from some Spore game on the DS. That's a name I haven't heard of in forever. Anyone else play that on Windows 7 back then? Anyways, I'm getting off topic. This game released on pretty much every relevant Nintendo console at the time. And the funniest part is that every version from the DS to the 3DS to the Wii play exactly the same. Unlike most handheld ports, this game plays just like the Wii version no matter what other version you're playing on, which when you get into the gameplay itself doesn't seem too surprising. This game takes place after the movie, technically making it Wreck-It Ralph 2 before Wreck-It Ralph 2. Now, I'll let you guys be the judge on what Wreck-It Ralph 2 is better in the comments, but there's really not much of a story. You pretty much just beat up bugs who infested the games. If there's one thing worth noting about this story or anything that's not the gameplay, it's the cutscenes. Like, what are these? For some reason, they felt the need to drop the entire budget on the opening and ending cutscenes, as everything else is just horrible. It looks like a PowerPoint presentation using Nintendo 64 renders. I would say this game has awful presentation, but you can't even call it that. What are they even presenting? This is absolutely horrible. It's worth noting that this game was also produced by Disney themselves, meaning they had a budget, they just didn't want to use it. But enough of that. We all know a game shouldn't be put down just because of graphics. That's like the least important element. You should never judge a book by its cover. The only issue is that this is a book with no pages. This game is a very bare bones and basic 2D platformer, where you can switch between Ralph, who can break boxes and climb ladders, and Felix, who can jump higher and do puzzles, if you can even call them that. To fight enemies, you gotta punch him, which is simple enough. The combat shouldn't really have to be too expansive at all, and I really didn't think too much of it. If there was something bad I could say about it, it's that, like, the game itself just feels very clunky and stiff. In no way is this game satisfying to control, so I guess that does hinder the combat a bit, but there's not much of this game anyways. The boss fights, however, make this a different story entirely. These are some of the most clunky and lazy boss fights I've ever experienced. You could just run up to the bosses and button mash. A few of them incorporate puzzles, but it all just boils down to mindless spamming. It doesn't help that this game feels very cheap. Everything down to the movement and level design feels like it was made in one of those amateur 3D game maker applications from the early 2000s. And just like the cutscenes and character models, these levels do not feel good to look at. I mean, what is this? This game is also extremely short, just like this video. It only has 12 levels and a few boss fights. I mean, if you want to pad out the experience, you can go after every single collectible, but I already did that, and I was completely done the game 100% in an hour and a half. I mean, look at this. Which, if I'm not wrong, is a shorter amount of time than the movie itself, which is crazy. I mean, to the game's credit, if you can even call it that, it does have a New Game Plus mode after you beat the story, but it's pretty much just the same thing, but you don't get checkpoints. Overall, there's not much to add about this game. It's super short, it's basic to a painful degree. The boss fights are a joke, the controls feel stiff and clunky, and the presentation, don't even get me started on those cutscenes, man. There is no presentation. This game doesn't know what that is. And the graphics make it look like a scrap Nintendo 64 game, and that's being very, very generous. The worst part is that this game somehow retailed for $60 when it released. My heart goes out to all 3 people who bought this. If I had to say anything nice about this game, it's that it is indeed playable. And the soundtrack isn't even that bad, it's actually pretty good. It's such a shame that this game had to turn out the way it did, as Wreck-It Ralph is probably the Disney movie with the most potential for a video game, yet they wasted it on what I think is the laziest game I've ever played in my life. I wouldn't even say this game is worth, like, checking out just to see how bad it is. It's not, like, laughably bad or anything, other than the cutscenes, I think. It's just such a lazy game, and it's so short, it's actually mind-blowing. And this did retail for $60. It sounds crazy I'm going so hard on a kid's game based on a kid's movie, but for $60, this is absolutely insane. And yeah, these cutscenes are just hilarious, man. Oh yeah, and did I mention? The game has voice acting.
If only I knew someone with a magic repairing hammer!